Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio. I just finished recording a chat with Joe Pike, political correspondent, and Chris Page, our correspondent in Belfast, about the stabbing attack that happened in that city on Monday night. There is a man in hospital in his 40s with serious injuries. There is a Sudanese man in his 30s in police custody, and the police not looking for anyone else in connection to this case. Just after we'd finished recording with Joe and Chris, we then got a news conference in Stormont from the leaders of Northern Ireland and the head of the police service of Northern Ireland, where we got a few more details. The main one being that the suspect travelled to Ireland from Paris and then travelled from Dublin to Northern Ireland, where he then claimed asylum and was granted leave to remain in the UK in 2023. So that is some extra detail that we didn't have when I got the backgrounds to this story from Joe Pike and Chris Page. Now, as we're sat here in the studio, Chris, we just had an update from the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Do you want to give us a summary of what they were saying?
Yes, the Police Service of Northern Ireland have been bringing us up to date really throughout the day, issuing regular updates on this investigation. So, firstly, as regards the victim of this attack, they say he's in hospital with serious injuries to his eyes and what they're calling slash wound injuries to his back and face. Now, police are saying they understand that the suspect, who they're questioning on suspicion of attempted murder, is Sudanese, and they're saying they're not looking for anyone else in connection with the investigation. Also, the police, in the shape of Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson, have said that they have been talking to senior counter-terrorism officials throughout the day, but they've said that because of the nature of the attack, at this stage they've no information to suggest that the stabbing was terrorist-related. However, they do say they're still at the early stages of the investigation. So really what we've had over the course of the last number of hours is police trying to reassure the community here in North Belfast, other communities across Northern Ireland, that they are taking this very seriously indeed, that the investigation is taking shape. And also, of course, they are saying that they understand that there is a great sense of shock about what has happened, and they are appealing for calm, and politicians indeed from across the political spectrum in Northern Ireland have very much echoed that call.
And Chris, there's a very graphic looking video that's being circulated quite widely on social media, but the police and lots of people have said, please do not share this video.
That's right. They've said that people shouldn't share this video because they say it could impact the investigation. Also, they're saying it could add to the suffering, the trauma of the victim here and his family. So this appeal has gone out. Police are conscious at the same time that the video has already been shared very, very widely indeed, and it is really what has been seen in that video that has generated so much attention just on this very quiet residential street in North Belfast, where I am at the moment. The police are maintaining a presence here. The police cordon is still up outside a block of apartments. The attack happened just outside there about 10:30 last night, really in what looks like a cul-de-sac. The apartment blocks are maybe about 3 or 4 stories high. So according to eyewitnesses, some people began to gather in the street, including children, whenever this attack happened. And then some people intervened. One had a hurling stick. They stopped the attack. Police then arrived. A suspect was arrested. And the police have really stated very clearly that they appreciate what they've described as the incredible bravery of the people who stopped this attack. So really, this has been a very fast-moving situation today. Police, I think, have been conscious of the need to try to put as much information from their side, as it were, into the public domain as possible. They've also been countering misinformation, disinformation that they say is online. For example, they say they are aware of inaccurate information online about the victim's condition. They said they can confirm he is in a serious condition in hospital. So that's one example of the online commentary that the police have identified as being untrue, as being inaccurate. And also, politicians, for example, the leaders of the five main parties in the devolved assembly at Stormont, all put out a joint statement today calling for calm and asking for the police to be given space to allow justice, as they said, to take its course. But also there have been appeals for people not to speculate online, and that if they have information about this, if they do genuinely know anything about this attack, well, the police is who they should be speaking to about that. They shouldn't be posting it on the internet.
And Joe, in terms of the reaction at Westminster, we've had a few things. Obviously, lots of politicians posting on social media their reactions. There was also an urgent question in the House of Commons answered by the Northern Ireland Secretary, Hilary Benn. And in the meantime, you had Kemi Badenoch doing a speech about race and the public sector organisations. Everyone's had an opportunity to talk about this.
Yes, and I think, Adam, the most obvious tension we saw, certainly in the House of Commons, was when various MPs, including Reform UK MPs and those from the Democratic Unionist Party and the TUV, the Traditional Unionist Voice, were asking Hilary Benn for clarity on the nationality of the person who has been arrested, but also their immigration status. And Hilary Benn did not want to comment on that, deferred to the PSNI, but also the Home Office. Now, my understanding from the Home Office, who obviously are in charge of immigration across the UK, is that they will only make any announcement in this sort of case if someone is charged. But we heard, as Chris touched on in that news conference in the last hour or so from the PSNI, further detail about the immigration status of the person who has been arrested, that they had leave to remain in the UK and that they had come to the UK through Dublin. So even though the Home Office won't give that information, the PSNI have given out the information but said you've got to wait for the Home Office too. Maybe a slightly confusing process here in getting information out. And of course, there was a sort of error earlier in the day when we were initially told the person who'd been arrested was Somali before that was changed by the PSNI to Sudanese, and they apologised for that mistake. Both Nigel Farage said pretty early in the morning, sort of 8:30 in the morning, that the authorities must reveal the identity and status of the attacker immediately. The public are entitled to the truth, he said. And then around lunchtime, the Tories said something similar. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, saying the government must ensure full details about the suspect's nationality and immigration status are released. Total transparency is required.
And Chris, in terms of this suspect's journey through the immigration system, which we still don't have all the details of, the fact that he appeared to enter the island of Ireland in Dublin might suggest that this is less a question about the safety of the UK's borders as about the safety of the Irish borders, and then what the UK immigration system does when somebody arrives on UK soil.
Yes, the land border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is open, essentially. There are no checkpoints there. So you've had politicians, particularly the likes of the Traditional Unionist Voice leader, Jim Allister is the MP for North Antrim, other Unionist parties too, pointing to that and saying that they think it is a weak spot, as it were, in the UK's immigration system. So that is something that is a topic of political debate here in Northern Ireland and also, as we've been hearing, in Westminster as well. So this will be something that will certainly be analysed, I think, the more we find out about the suspect's immigration status and the specifics, if you like, of the journey into the UK, into Northern Ireland. Well, that is something that will inevitably, I think, feed into that debate and be discussed as part of that wider debate around immigration, in particular Northern Ireland's place in that, and particularly in the case of Northern Ireland. Well, it is about that land border, as many, as I say, particularly Unionist politicians will see it.
And Chris, a lot of the politicians talking today have been urging people not to go out and, well, basically riot tonight as a result of this because of the strong feelings. And quite often people have been saying we don't want it to be like Ballymena in 2025. Just remind us what actually happened in that town last year.
Yeah, it is just about a year ago since we had a week really of rioting in Northern Ireland that started in Ballymena in County Antrim but spread to other towns as well. The spark really there in Ballymena last June came after a protest over an alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl. Two 14-year-old boys appeared in court, charged over that attack. They spoke in court through a Romanian interpreter, and those charges a few months later on were withdrawn. So a protest was held in support of the girl and her family, but then crowds came onto the streets and rioting broke out over several nights, firstly in Ballymena and then, as I say, in other towns such as Larne and Portadown. And over that week, more than 60 police officers were injured. So it was really a dreadful week, particularly for the police on the front line of that. It's something that police are very conscious of going into every summer in Northern Ireland. I mean, going back years and years and years, you, of course, have had riots of a completely different nature, if you like, sparked by totally different issues around controversies, for example, over parading. So it's something the police in Northern Ireland are always geared up for every summer, and they're particularly conscious, really, that this incident in North Belfast, that there have been calls for people to come onto the streets and protest, and the police are conscious of that and are trying to manage the situation and working with politicians, indeed, to try to appeal for calm.
And Joe, later on in this episode, we're going to talk about Elon Musk selling shares in SpaceX's company, but Elon Musk has got involved in this today.
Yeah, he retweeted the Restore MP, the Great Yarmouth MP Rupert Lowe, who just tweeted at 7:18 this morning, enough. And I suppose that one promotes Rupert Lowe, but also promotes the idea that there are questions around this over immigration. Of course, towards the end of last week, we had that intervention from the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, also on social media, also talking about a crime where race played a part. Although in that incident, which was the murder of Henry Novak, actually we spoke to the Crown Prosecution Service, who said that the murderer there, Vikram Digwa, was UK born. And I suppose one of the challenges with these sorts of stories, and the Southport murders is probably the best example, is that there isn't clear information, even though the police since Southport have been quicker at trying to give information about often the nationalities and immigration status of people who are suspects. And you had obviously unrest and riots after Southport, and yet Axel Rudikabana was born in Cardiff to Rwandan parents and moved to Southport more recently. What you are, though, seeing, if we take a step away from Northern Ireland, what we have seen in a number of different cases is a sort of series of events which echo each other. You obviously have an incident, sometimes where there's been a suspect who is non-white. You have speculation around that. You have political interventions, and then sometimes you have protests, which can, at points, get violent, and then calls for calm. We should say that there are certainly people who have raised questions and been involved in protests who have really heartfelt concerns and problems about both immigration and integration, and how immigration affects their communities and what it means for their families. However, you also have this problem that people often jump to conclusions or want to speak out before they know the facts. And that is partly because these sorts of incidents, Adam, some of them at least, prompt such a sort of emotional reaction. People want to voice that emotion and maybe call for change.
And Chris, just a last word from you on this. The thing that I found really striking about the Police Service of Northern Ireland news conference this afternoon was again and again and again, they said it's okay for people to have strong feelings about this. What matters is what you do with those strong feelings.
Yes, that's right. I think what police are certainly very much trying to avoid here is any perception that they are indifferent to this, that they're not doing enough. They are very much making the point again and again, as you say, that they are taking this as seriously as they can, that they understand community feelings, that they understand the strength of those communities' feelings, but they're appealing for that not to translate into a big problem on the streets, particularly, as I've said, when you look back at what was happening around this time last year. Everybody knows the dangers of that around incidents like this. And the part of the police strategy, it seems to me, is to try to make the point that they care about what communities think and feel and say even about these sorts of incidents, but they're trying within that to try to stop people from taking it any further.
Chris in Belfast, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
And Joe here in the studio, thank you to you too.
Thanks, Adam.
Now, let's talk about Elon Musk again, because he is doing an IPO, an initial public offering of a chunk of his company, SpaceX, which, amongst other things, does those rockets that we've seen very dramatically go up and then come back down to Earth, Starlink, his telecoms company, and xAI, which you might have seen as Grok, the AI tool on X, formerly known as Twitter. And as part of an IPO, you have to publish a prospectus, which means there was a 400-page document full of details and charts and quite bold aspirations that I could read before I spoke to the BBC's business editor, Simon Jack, who's covering the story. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Adam.
Have you read the whole SpaceX prospectus?
I haven't read all the annexes at the back, but I've read enough.
It's hundreds and hundreds of pages, isn't it?
It's about 280 pages, and plus bits and bobs at the end. Yeah, It's quite a document, an unusual document, I think we could call it.
And these prospectuses are just a usual part of the IPO process of a company going public, so that people can buy shares. You have to publish kind of your vision for.
Here's what we do. Here's how we think we're going to do it. Here's some of the risks involved in doing it, and here's what we hope to achieve in the fullness of time. It's basically a kind of sales brochure with risks added into it. And, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is the most hotly anticipated stock market event in history. And that is probably the oddest prospectus I've ever read, because it makes some very modest claims about raising consciousness to the stars and setting up a moon base, a
Mars base,
making humanity an interplanetary species. We heard this stuff before, but seeing it in black and white in an official document is quite something.
And we can talk about the reality or otherwise of realisticness of those visions in a second. But just in terms of how an IPO works, what's actually happening here?
So up to now, only a few individuals, including Elon Musk and some very deep-pocketed institutions, have had the ability to own shares in SpaceX. There comes a time in a company's life when it decides it wants to have some public currency, if you like, to find out what it's worth in the real world. And so you offer a chunk, a little bit, about 5% of the company, to the general public, the likes of you and me and people watching, saying, would you like to come and own a piece of this? And so they're only selling a bit of the company, but based on the price of that bit of the company, you can extrapolate what the whole company is worth. And what we know is that they're trying to get a price of $1.75 trillion. That's the biggest IPO in history. So they're only raising between 75 and 85 billion. But that makes the whole company worth 1.75 trillion, which comfortably puts it in the top 10 most valuable companies of all time, anywhere on the planet. And what then happens is, because they can then in the future sell more shares to raise more money to do more stuff. And SpaceX is not the only people who are doing it. Anthropic, who are also AI pioneers with their Claude model, OpenAI with ChatGPT, they're also joining this in what is probably the biggest set of blockbuster releases in stock market history.
And let's talk about what people might be buying when it comes to SpaceX, because, the name on the tin is SpaceX, but actually it's a whole load of companies. And I was reading in the prospectus, there's something like 236 subsidiary companies as well.
Yeah, so it's 3 or 4 main businesses. There's the rocket bit, which is the most visible thing, and you've seen all the rocket coming down and being caught and reused and all that kind of stuff. There's they'll launch, and then there's the satellite manufacture and launch business. They'll launch their own satellites and other people's. And then there's the profitable bit, which is the network of their own satellites, which comes together to make the Starlink network for communications, which we've seen has been very geopolitically important. With switching it on and off over Ukraine, for example. And then
it provides your Wi-Fi on a plane now in a lot of airlines.
Exactly. And it's got 10 million customers now. It's making billions of dollars. That's actually a profitable bit of business. But overall, SpaceX is not profitable. It lost $5 billion last year. And then you've got, if you like, the meat in the sandwich, which is kind of speculative meat, if you like. Speculative
My
meat.
favourite kind.
There we go. That's a sentence I never expected to say.
Hang on, are you doing an IPO for your company too? Anyway.
But the point is, there's the other bit, and that's XAI, and that is a combination of the social media platform we used to know as Twitter, now known as X, and the AI bit of Elon Musk's empire, which is all bundled in. And the truth is, this is not really, it's not mainly about rockets. It's not really about rockets at all, in a way. The bulk of the future revenue they're hoping to make comes from the AI bit. And some deep space stuff as well, like, for example, putting data centers in orbit or on the moon or manufacturing solar panels and all that kind of stuff. That's the bit that has to work for this IPO to make sense.
But you're basically buying a share of an AI company that has some very visible rockets.
Exactly. It's an AI company with a few rockets thrown in.
And then in terms of the concept of ownership, I mean, normally if somebody comes in and buys loads and loads of shares of a company, they then have a say in how that company is run. That's not going to be the case this time.
Oh, no, that is definitely not the way Elon rolls. So basically, he will still own about 42% of the company. But some shares are different than others. They come with extra voting rights. So he will have over 80% say. So effectively, he has total control of the company. Now, some people I've spoken to have said, if I'm buying something and owning something over which I have no control, I'd like a slight discount on the face value of that. But in the Elon Musk world, most people are expected to pay a premium for the questionable privilege of owning something they have no control over, because that, I think, is really the secret sauce in this. It's this maverick, naysayer, disproving genius kind of cult figure, some would call him, some have called him. And that's where it becomes, very difficult to imagine that some of these things are possible. But betting against Elon Musk has proved to be a very unprofitable pastime in the past.
I've just done a search on the prospectus for how many times the word Musk appears in the 400 pages, and it's 440 times.
So more than one a page.
Which proves that that's basically what you're buying a bit of him.
Yeah, you are. And some people I've spoken to saying, there is a cult of Elon Musk and you're buying a little bit of that. And, most people who came to market with a proposition like this, people would say you've got to be crazy. And people said he was crazy when he tried to take on the combined might of the car market, but totally gave it a kick up the backside, revolutionized that. And what's interesting is that Tesla, for example, everyone thought Tesla's going to go bust, blah, 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 it's going to run out of money. It didn't. And now it's worth more than General Motors, Volkswagen, Ford, Toyota combined. And what his great skill is that just when the car business was plateauing and everyone was catching up a bit, he sort of said, well, Tesla isn't really about cars. It's actually about robots. It's actually about humanoid robots, and I'm going to build 1 billion of them, and every household on the planet is going to have. It'll be the most popular consumer product of all time. So he just sort of bait and switch, and suddenly you thought it was a car company. Now it's not a car company, and people say he's a great showman. He's more like P.T. Barnum than he is like Rockefeller or Warren Buffett.
And we've alluded to this a few times, just what his ambitions are. But it's worth just drilling down into some of the examples. I mean, I was then reading this prospectus and thinking, are we actually buying shares in the future energy of the world? Because one of his visions is these solar panels in space where you can collect loads of solar power without any atmosphere in the way, and you've basically got a limitless free source of energy. So actually, are people going to be buying shares in the energy grid in 200 years' time?
Well, he's saying, remember the data centers that go power AI have got some physical constraints. They require enormous amounts of energy, and they require enormous amount of water usually to cool them. His answer is if you put them in space or on the moon, you've got limitless supply of solar energy, and it kept cool by the chill of deep space. So you solve both problems in one go. And actually, if you look at some of the pushback that you've seen in some parts of the US and elsewhere about data centers going to certain neighborhoods, are saying, actually, you know what, don't take all our energy, don't take all our water. Maybe, he does have the advantage of saying, well, I can make mine in space. No one else can. So he will have a competitive advantage in AI. But at the moment, and we've talked a little bit about Anthropic, which makes Claude, and OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, they're also lining up blockbuster share offerings. And I would say, at the moment, XAI is not in the lead in the AI race. And a lot depends on that. And the other thing that people are thinking about is that, when you sell a little bit of the company, you can then begin to sell off chunks more. If SpaceX does that, and Anthropic and OpenAI do that, then you're actually looking at sort of several $1 trillion worth of shares coming onto the market. And people say, is there a point? And people will say, actually, that's a glut of shares.
And also there's not enough spare money in the world lying around to buy those shares.
Well, exactly. And some people are already saying that some portfolio managers will start selling some stuff to raise the cash they need to include these new names in their portfolio.
So currently successful companies with high share prices might suffer as people go, let's take a bit out of them to put into space.
Yeah, we need to raise a bit of money so we can buy some of the new shiny objects which are available on the stock markets, and maybe we'll get rid of a few shares in that one. So, there are some potential distorting factors. That is what happened in the dot-com bust, which is that all these companies IPO'd and then they kept selling all the shares. And eventually people just gagged on how much there was. And they were being asked to take, these companies weren't making profit and they were selling shares. Sounds a bit familiar to right now. And, that's the issue. The difference now, though, is that there's been an explosion in something called index tracking funds, which rather than try and pick out which companies are going to do better than the other, you just buy the whole index. And there are trillions of dollars in these funds. And so when these companies, as they surely will, join those indexes, those index funds will have to buy them. So they will soak up some of that supply. And that will be some kind of, give some support.
And also, most people who have a private pension, and actually lots of other workplace pensions as well, will be buying these stocks.
Well, exactly, whether you like it or not. And you can apply directly to your local stockbroker or investment platform to
Pick
try
up the phone after you've left your club.
Yes, exactly. And by the way, people who, deal with, normal people's investments have said there's been a surge in interest in this. But even if you don't directly apply for them, you will almost certainly end up owning some of these companies because, as I say, anyone who's got a share, a pension with shares in it will have some allocation to US shares, and in that will be indexes in which this will be included. So whether you like it or not, you're on the Elon Musk train.
And of course, Elon Musk isn't just an entrepreneur and an engineer and a soon-to-be trillionaire. He's a bit of a politician as well. I mean, we saw today he was retweeting messages about what happened in Belfast last night.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a front row seat, not even a front row seat. He's been on the court, hasn't he, in this game of politics in the US. Very substantial contributor to Donald Trump's re-election, Trump 2.0, if you like, $280 million, something of that order. Actually turned out to be a pretty good investment because SpaceX has had billions and billions of dollars in federal government contracts to launch government stuff into space. Obviously, you're only... Even if you're an investor in one of his companies, you're only a tweet away from something's controversial. And he's involved himself, as you say, in the internal politics of many countries, including the UK. He's been involved with Tommy Robinson, etc., and on those comments last night. So he's not an uncontroversial.
But as we were discussing a few minutes ago, even though he's now going to take part of his company public, that doesn't mean he has to shut up because of shareholders saying, "Can you shut up, please?" Because the shareholders don't have that power over him because of the ownership structure we've been discussing.
They don't have that power over him. Even so, he has in the past managed to get himself in trouble. Not necessarily with his shareholders, who generally take, whatever, but with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because sometimes if you've got publicly traded companies and you start firing off saying, this is happening, that's happening, they get tetchy about that. Like, is it market manipulation? Is everyone getting the same information at the same time?
So he's slightly less free
when
this goes public.
Yeah, I think potentially because your public markets and people have, like mom and pop have got shares in it. You're held to a higher standard.
And just in terms of how this is being sold to the public, look at it this way: I'm a Star Wars fan, and I'm a fan of markets as well, and all this stuff. I think I've probably had more pop-up adverts for SpaceX than I did for the Mandalorian film.
Really?
Which tells you about just the world we're in. It's a sort of, they call it meme stocks, don't they? Where people who are not professional investors just sort of get advertised stuff and get excited about stuff that they've read on Reddit. They're like, oh, I'll buy that.
Well, bear in mind that Elon Musk is basically a 15-year-old Isaac Asimov fan who's got billions of dollars and is achieving the dream that Isaac Asimov set out in his Foundation series. Do you know what I mean? He's a massive sci-fi nut. So it doesn't surprise me that the algorithm is putting you in that stream.
Interesting. Also, one other thing from this prospectus, his idea that he'll be able to use these SpaceX rockets like planes, and one day you'll be able to get on a SpaceX rocket, I don't know, in London, and then end up in Sydney in like 25 minutes because you've gone through space rather than around the world.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe it's possible, maybe it isn't. They did try that HOTOL. It was going to be that high altitude thing which could get from London to Sydney in a few hours. That didn't work. But listen, like I say, you write off Elon Musk at your peril. He's proved a lot of people wrong, and just listen, making one multi-billion-dollar company is pretty impressive. He's got about 8 or 9. And he's got some of the biggest companies in the world. So
I wonder
he's got some claim to be the most remarkable person.
I
Of the 21st
just
century.
wonder how many people who are going to buy shares in a few days' time will end up on one of his Martian bases in their lifetime. I think it's going to be a tiny number, maybe even less than 1.
Yeah, if you think that you're basically by buying shares, you might get a discount on the day trip to Mars. I think,
especially when you go through the documents and you realize, actually, as we said at the start, what you're buying at the moment is a software company, is an AI company.
You're buying an AI company with a few rockets thrown in, but he knows how to capture people's imagination, and he's surely done that.
Simon, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. You can listen to us every single day as a podcast, and we're available to download from BBC Sounds. And we will be back with another episode of Newscast very soon. Bye-bye.